human family. Welcome. Welcome to this webinar sponsored by the International Association of Academicians for Peace, with a special focus this time on the Unification Theological Seminary's Peace Studies program. The program host, IAAP, is a global interdisciplinary academic project of the Universal Peace Federation, initiated by Dr. Haksha Moon, who is often called the Mother of Peace. She is the co-founder of UPF, together with her late husband, Reverend Sang Myang Moon, whose ascension to the heavenly realms 10 years ago will be celebrated in about 2 weeks in Korea on August 14. And in addition to founding UPF, they both founded the Unification Theological Seminary and numerous other peace-related organizations. To get back to today, the title of the seminar or webinar is Korean Reunification, the Role of Religion and Peace Studies. And it's very interesting that religion is often overlooked and misunderstood these days. Yet religious concerns are universal because they deal with the basics of life and death. According to the venerable Harvard Divinity School's Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative, religions define values, worldviews, and people's notions of belonging. And that it must be very important for peace and nationality and so on. Another very common view is represented by the large Arizona State University's Center for the Study of Religion and Conflict, which is next door where I am. And they say, they claim that there is a sort of assumption, I quote here, that as technology progresses, as knowledge progresses, we get less religious and we become more secular. Well, to help sort this all out, we have an eminent panel. And of course, you might have questions. Kindly write them in the chat, and we will address as many of them as we can after the three speakers. Our first panelist is Dr. Thomas Walsh. He graduated in 1979 from the Unification Theological Seminary, and after teaching courses at a number of colleges and universities, Dr. Walsh returned this year of 2022 to be its new president. Dr. Walsh also worked closely with UTS co-founders Reverend Sang Myang Moon and his wife, Dr. Haksha Moon, in the 2005 establishment of the Universal Peace Federation, where he serves as the international chair. The UPF holds a general consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC. Dr. Walsh has edited more than 20 books and publications related to interfaith, peace building, and the renewal of the United Nations, and is currently executive director of the academic journal Dialogue and Alliance. He earned his PhD at Vanderbilt University School of Religion, where he specialized in the study of religion and ethics. And I can keep on talking about him, but I will allow you to listen to him directly. Here is Dr. Walsh. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind, generous introduction, Dr. Stefan Berg. And I'm delighted to be part of this program and join with Dr. Michael Jenkins, the president of UPF International, and Dr. Thomas Ward, the recent past president of the Unification Theological Seminary, and now its provost. And of course, I'm delighted to be on this panel with my wife. She said she wanted to keep an eye on me and make sure I stay on topic. So thank you for having me. So maybe what I can do, I'd like to talk a little bit just about the role of religion in the area of conflict and peace. And if I may, I'd like to share a slideshow. I have about 6 or 7 slides that I'd like to go through quickly, if time permits. Can you see my slides?
We can.
Yes.
So I just thought, say a few things about factors that may contribute to conflict or peace. And what one is that people fear one another and they aspire for security in their lives. I guess what I'm trying to do here is show a kind of a multiplicity of factors that can contribute to conflict. And this list is not exhaustive, but it helps, I believe, to also see within that context of factors that there is also a religious factor at play. Fear and security maybe are often referred to as one of the core issues of war, peace, conflict. External threats, we see it in the recent invasion of Ukraine, with Russia claiming that there are threats coming from NATO, et cetera, and vice versa. So the concept of external threats, they're internal threats that a central government may feel from certain groups within its borders, and then there are divisions within countries. There's the economic factor that is at play. Sometimes people associate conflict and war with the desire to have resources, for example. Geography. Some say geography is destiny in geopolitical matters. If in the United States, for example, has always enjoyed being separated from much of the world by two big oceans, and that it is able to more or less dominate its hemisphere, its own sphere on the globe. There are national and ethnic interests that play often into conflict. And here I put in religion. It's not the sole source of conflict, but it is one of the contributing factors at times, as we may say is something that we might call worldview or ideology, and so on, with culture, values, identity that we have. There are factors that can be attributed to things like collective anger or resentment or humiliation, specific nations that may feel that 100 years ago they were humiliated by a particular hegemonic power, and they are determined to repay that time of humiliation. Second slide, just religion. First, it's a big thing. It's not a little thing. It's a big thing out there in the world, whether you're a believer or not, and it has big numbers. That's why I put it in all caps. And religion spreads. It kind of spreads through word of mouth, but also spreads, through reproduction. So families reproduce children, and they usually educate within a religion, and it's sticky. As we heard in the introduction from Dr. Berg, there many have predicted it's going to fade away, but it sticks around. It's not as easy to get out of our lives. Religious actors engage in the world. They vote, they buy, they sell, they raise children. Religious actors have moral values, strong moral values. We see that recently in the United States with the issues and debates about abortion. And religious actors want a world to reflect its values. The other phenomenon I think that makes the UTS program in peace studies important, in addition to the fact that the Family Federation for World Peace and the Universal Peace Federation for World Peace are dedicated to building a world of peace that we might, in religious language, call the kingdom of God. building a world that resembles God's ideal and God's will. So many have pointed out that there's been a resurgence of religion and its significance and impact on nations and international relations since the ending of the Cold War, where the world was in many ways kind of divided between a USSR that prohibited religion and a kind of liberal democratic capitalist sphere that allowed religious freedom, but was kind of saying religion is separate from the primary instruments of government. And we're seeing counter-secularization as well as resurgence in this kind of post-Cold War era. So we've seen religion in areas of conflict from the Middle East to the Balkans. And these are all areas, by the way, where the Universal Peace Federation is quite active, and areas where our peace studies program will also give attention. South Asia, issues in Nepal, or the rise of Narendra Modi as a very, very prominent, strong Hindu who's backed by a strong Hindu-centered movement. The USA, we see the kind of polarizations in this country between a religious left and a religious right. Russia, many talk about Russia and its invasion of Ukraine as linked to a certain theological worldview. There were quotations of Vladimir Putin when Crimea was annexed that it was a sacred duty, a sacred honor of Mother Russia, and the role of the Russian Orthodox Church is held extremely significant and important. We know that religion is important to the Islamic world. There are more than 50 nations who belong to the Organization of the Islamic Conference. Africa, even China, has issues with religion, the Uyghurs, the Falun Gong, and a population of, some say, between 60 and 100 million Christians. A lot of books have come out on this topic, since the end of the Cold War. Samuel Huntington's famous book on the Clash of Civilizations, Doug Johnston's Religion, the Missing Dimension of Statecraft, and others that are indicative of a growing awareness among political scientists and even the peace studies field of the significance of religion. And then we can see that religion can be an agent of peace, but it can also serve as an agent of division and conflict. We believe that religion and our peace studies program at UTS will help to find ways that people of faith and faith-based organizations and religious believers can truly become agents of peace in that kind of soft power sphere. So there's need for increasing religious and cultural literacy, knowing about religion. Many non-believers or secular persons stay away from religion. This is a big mistake. They don't necessarily have to join a religion, but they should be very religiously literate or literate of the religious world and of believers and how it impacts our world. And appreciation of the soft power, that the hard power instruments of government, military, and economic sanctions, but in addition, the effort to influence and shape and influence other governments through education, through diplomacy, through trade and commerce, and the like. And there is a soft power dimension of NGOs and faith-based organizations and religion, and that we can see in organizations like the Universal Peace Federation, which has faith-based roots and strongly affirms the role of religious actors in the world. So an appreciation of interreligious diplomacy and interreligious dialogue to build harmony, appreciation of intra-religious diplomacy and dialogue to build better harmony within religions, because religions, like political parties, can also be highly polarized. So I wanted to just kind of share these slides and as a way to just emphasize that religion is not a separated sphere out there, but it's deeply embedded in our human identities all over the world. It's at play because as human beings, we're economic actors, political actors, cultural actors in the world, and many, and indeed most of the world's population, we are religious actors as well. And this must be understood and appreciated and addressed. So we hope to do that more and more at UTS on a broad and global level. Thank you. I hope I stayed within my time limit.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walsh. Time limit, you can talk to the last panelist about that if she gets some time left here. She'll be appreciating that. Anyway, I really appreciate your message here about bringing religion to the forefront of our thinking. It is somewhere in there in everybody's mind and heart, yet maybe it's just as a vague fear, and through what you explained, it can also become a great asset, especially in building peace. So thank you very much for your comments, and those of you in the audience who would like to find out more, don't hesitate to write your questions in the chat. Our next speaker is Dr. Thomas Ward, and as Dr. Walsh said, he's a current provost of the Unification Theological Seminary, and he was its immediate past president. He also serves now as a professor of this Peace and Development Studies program. Prior to that, he's got a lot of experience in academia. He's 18 years as dean of the University of Bridgeport's College of Public and International Affairs, where he taught graduate courses on culture and development, peace and conflict studies, and political and economic integration. He has also a worldwide scope of action. He lived and worked in the US, Europe, Latin America, East Asia. He lectures in English, French, and Spanish, and has a working knowledge of several other European and Asian languages. He has been a Fulbright Scholar, a Taiwan Foreign Ministry Research Fellow, guest lecturer at the Beijing Academy of Social Science and at Academia Sinica's Institute of Modern History in Taipei, Taiwan. Dr. Ward has authored or edited more than 10 books, including March to Moscow, the role of the Reverend Sun Myung Moon and the collapse of communism, and has published numerous other articles worldwide. He earned his doctorate at the De La Salle University. And here is my dear brother, Dr. Ward. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Berg, for your kind invitation to participate in today's program. I really appreciate it. And I also appreciate the fact that we're joined here today by Dr. Jenkins, who I know has also been so pivotal to the organization of not just today's conference, but so many of the wonderful conferences that he hosts on a weekly basis for UPF here in the United States. So my gratitude to both of you as we start. I also feel very privileged to be able to be here today with my president, Dr. Thomas Walsh, and also my professor, Lynn Walsh, because she's part of the provost domain, so to speak, even though she's Dr. Walsh's wife. And she's really a wonderful professor. And actually her field of study is counseling. And counseling is fundamental to the peace studies. Let me just mention that. I will be speaking on the topic, likewise, as Dr. Walsh has begun, on peace studies, religion, Korean reunification. And I think already through Dr. Walsh's presentation, we've seen the pivotal role that religion plays. We all know the role that religion plays. I mean, religion is what allows us to have self-control, self-discipline, allows us to, it defines our values, and it really serves as the vehicle, if we can follow those principles and norms, to be able to relate properly to those who surround us and to be able to promote a more peaceful world and be able to negotiate as one needs to do in order to maintain peace. So I'd like to begin. I'd like to also share a few slides, actually a few more than Dr. Walsh, but I will try to go through them as quickly as possible so that I also can respect the time that has been given me and give plenty of time for Professor Walsh to respond. So Korean reunification, the role of religion and peace studies. First of all, I just want to say how excited we are because through Dr. Walsh's presidency, he brings so many years of skill working in the international field. How many people do you know who've traveled in 120 countries? How many people do you know who have been involved in addressing conflict-related issues in the Middle East, in Africa, in Asia? How many people do you know who literally met scores and scores of heads of state and had a chance to interface with them? This is such a rich component, as I said, for us to be able to have at UTS at this time. And we also are very excited by the fact that Professor Walsh is also going to be among those who are teaching in our Peace Studies program at UTS. As I said, really fundamental, and I think we'll get on that a little bit in my presentation here, fundamental to peace studies is counseling, person-to-person relations. That's where it all begins. And that's where finally peace needs to begin there. It has to begin in that interface between individuals. So I'm going to touch a little bit upon Korean reunification, and I think a unique take on Korean reunification. Most people, when they think of Korean reunification, they might think in terms of, well, in the future, Korea can be a neutral power. It can find itself between China and the emerging so-called Quad of the United States, Korea, Japan, and China, which surround China and can be able to serve as the basis to kind of hopefully encourage China to move in a democratic direction. Others see the future of Korean reunification as Korea being Finlandized, in the sense that Korea's foreign policy and things in the future will be controlled by the People's Republic of China simply because of its geographical proximity to mainland China. And others have the hope that Korea will survive and flourish as a liberal democracy. But from the lens of religion to start, I want to look at Korean reunification a little bit differently, if you will, and consider how religion and peace studies contribute to the conversation on Korean reunification. Religion, as I've already suggested, and as Dr. Walsh has elaborated, recognizes human limitations, and it also provides living examples of how to go beyond those limitations. And it's often said that religion is the basis of culture, and that culture is the basis of the social and legal framework of any given society. And so the norm, it doesn't matter where you go, is if you want to change the laws, you must first change the culture. A lot of the dramatic transformations that have occurred in America over the past couple of decades are directly connected to the fact that cultural values have changed, that central appreciations have shifted. And because of that, it has resulted now in some rather dramatic changes in terms of the way in which the law uses a whole variety of things, including marriage, including even when does life begin for a child. All of these issues, they stem from a transformation of our cultural values. When we look at the United States, there were religious values at the very base of our country. And it was the commitment of America's founders that what they wanted to do as they put together that remarkable document of the Constitution was to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Blessings of liberty. They understood that this liberty didn't just come from them, that liberty somehow had a divine origin. And they also understood that the liberty was not just for them, but was meant to be able to carry on into the future. So they had that kind of a vision. And amazingly, if we consider the preamble to the Charter of the United Nations, it actually reads somewhat similarly. There were also a series of concerns about the future. to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. They weren't just thinking about themselves. They were thinking about the future and the way in which things would go in the future. And they also wished to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights. And although they don't say it here, we know that those fundamental human rights, they stem essentially from the Western value system. And fundamentally, it goes back to the Judeo-Christian tradition about the great value of human life. And also the call for tolerance and living together in peace with one another as good neighbors. This is not about these ideals that we see in the US Constitution or that we see in the Charter of the United Nations. These are not about whether or not Korea will be Finlandized, or whether or not Korea will be a constitutional democracy, or even about whether or not Korea will serve as a buffer between the East and the West. These are defining values which go far beyond those other issues, and are indeed must be the foundation of any discussion on the reunification of Korea. The United Nations, I think we're all aware, really was inspired by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He had this incredible dream of the United Nations. And where did that dream come from? Well, it's not a stretch to say that United Nations sounds an awful lot like United States. And it was Roosevelt's expectation that somehow the ideals, the things that he believed in the United States, that they could hopefully eventually be expanded to a worldwide level through the United Nations. The kinds of values and ideals, they could be also encoded within the UN, so that the American worldview could be able to be applied on a much broader scale through the institution of the United Nations. Nevertheless, John Adams, and I believe that this applies not just to the US Constitution, but also to the UN. John Adams said, "We have no government armed with the power which is capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion." It's dangerous if we don't have religion which somehow guides oneself to be able to control passions, to be able to subscribe to a moral code. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. So he was so clear about this point and about the central role that religion was meant to play in governance. So, as I said, these three alternatives that are often discussed about the future of Korea, in some sense, I think it's safe to say that they are irrelevant. That's not where we should be looking at as the future of Korea. But we have to go deeper than that if we think about what's going to guide Korea. If Korea is to really be able to become like an endpoint where people around the world realize that this is the one unification that really is a defining one, a country divided in half. It's a defining one. It's kind of symbolic of the incredible divided world that we went throughout the 20th century. And this is like the final resolution of that in so many respects. And the UPF view about Korean reunification, I believe, is a much deeper view than whether or not we're going to go the way of neutrality or a Finlandized state or a liberal democracy. It looks at those fundamental issues about interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values. Universal values, those values that are found in all the great religions. And interdependence, recognizing if we really depend upon each other, we have to learn to get along with each other. And peace studies is a discipline where one learns how to do that. And mutual prosperity, how is it that we take the steps to build a more just world? Because that is a part and parcel of the whole process of bringing about peace. One of the founding fathers of modern peace studies, Johan Galtung, he often speaks about the idea of negative peace versus positive peace. And positive peace is a peace which addresses the fundamental injustices that exist because of this inequality that one finds in so many parts of the world, and even amongst and between countries. So to conclude, I'd like to turn my attention to what really is a central theme. Dr. Walsh and I were speaking just yesterday with a scholar who's going to be speaking to our faculty on peace studies, and he brought up what's referred to as the curve of conflict. And the curve of conflict provides so many lessons, and it is a defining point, I think. It's called Lund's curve. Michael Lund, who is associated with the United States Institute of Peace, actually is responsible for this curve. And it's a very, very deep curve. And I believe it really serves kind of as a roadmap and invites reflection upon not just nation to nation relations, but also to human relations. There are different levels of peace in this curve. There's something called durable peace. Durable peace, I see that we have Franco Famolaro and Robert Duffy on our audience today. It's the kind of relationship that exists between the United States and Canada. Both of them, by the way, are Canadians. God bless them. That durable peace means even though we don't always agree, there are so many things that we share in common that somehow it's very difficult to break apart Canada and the United States. We are really bound at the hip. And then there's something known as stable peace. And stable peace is another kind of peace. It's a peace where there's a whole variety of things where you can engage a certain country, but you know that there are certain things that you cannot engage that country about. For example, in terms of US-China relations, there are all types of things that we can talk about concerning trade. But we certainly know that if we begin to talk about Taiwan and share the American view versus the Chinese view, immediately that stable peace is going to be destabilized, and we're going to move into the realm of an unstable peace. An unstable peace, that might be such as the relationship that exists between the United States and Iran. And in that type of relationship, there's something that you cannot not talk about. When the United States and Iran sit down and start to talk, the United States wants absolutely to talk about the presence of nuclear weapons and the potential of that developing in Iran. And Iran wants to speak about the relationship that exists between the United States and Israel. Immediately, there is going to be tension there. And they cannot but argue between each other. And all of that leads to a crisis, what we saw for many months, for example, between Ukraine and Russia, and finally, which culminated, as we know, in a war. So this is the curve of conflict. This is the various levels at which conflict exists amongst nations. And at each level, there are certain types of things that need to be done in order to be able to address conflict and provide solutions. But what I want to talk about today is I just want to invite us to recognize that the curve of conflict, it's not just about the relationship from one nation to another. It's also about the relationship that exists amongst human beings. The relationships that exist within a family, even, for example. Between a husband and wife, is there a durable peace? Even though they may differ about all different kinds of things, is there something which is strong enough that always is able to bring them back together again? Or is it a stable peace where husband and wife, they can talk about all kinds of things, but they know that there are certain things that they can't talk about because as soon as they do, suddenly whatever communication or resonance was there, it begins to fall apart. Or unstable peace where husband and wife, each time they see each other, there is some fundamental issue that exists so that every time that they see each other, immediately it breaks out into dispute. And that ultimately leads to a crisis. And who suffers in those crises? Obviously, the children. And ultimately, we know tragically, the culmination of this type of conflict in the family is, of course, divorce, which is where things end. So my point is that humanity is in search of lasting peace. And also Korea is in search of lasting peace. If you come to UTS and you study, by the way, we have our Doctor of Ministry has a special concentration in peace and justice. Our Master of Arts in Religious Studies program has a whole program in interfaith peace building. And we have a new Master of Arts in Peace Studies. If you take any of our peace studies courses, you will discover that there are so many different types of skills, both skills that we learned from the great religious traditions, the skills that we find were exhibited by people like Gandhi in terms of bringing about, can you imagine the independence of India? He was able to liberate hundreds of millions of people through the vehicle of nonviolence. Or if you know about Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the Muslim gentlemen who worked together with Gandhi, who also played a key role in likewise engaging the Islam of his time in a nonviolent approach. Dr. Martin Luther King, those of you from the Philippines, the EDSA revolution, all of those in search of a lasting peace. We know that religion informs that, but also peace studies as a social science informs that. Not just the Lund's curve, but there's so many other concepts. What leverage does each side have in a conflict? What is the point of ripeness when both sides begin to see it would be better to be at a negotiating table rather than disputing with each other? We look at all those different types of things in our peace curriculum at Unification Theological Seminary. So quite simply, if we look at Korea in the future, I believe that on your right column there, you see the values that are outlined in the United Nations. Never forget that the United Nations is responsible for South Korea's ability to preserve its democracy when they made that solemn decision more than half a century ago to somehow stand up for Korea at a time when it needed great support. And so it's important, and I think that's a component. Those ideals that are embodied there in that preamble should be a part of the future Korea. Korea must be based not on simply a political model or a political or economic alliance. If it is to last and become an example, I believe that Korean reunification must take into account universal values that the people within the Koreas can be able to identify with and resonate with. Interdependence, so that people can be able to recognize the value of all types of relations amongst individuals, and mutual prosperity, so that all people can be able to work together to be able to create a more prosperous globe. So those are some of the fundamental issues I wanted to touch upon. And as I said, I believe that both religion and peace studies, I think Dr. Walsh and I both have been trying to show, and through these presentations, they make an incredible difference in terms of really advancing Korean reunification. And I thank you, Dr. Berg, for pointing that also in your introduction to your written introduction to today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ward. That was, wow, that's wonderful. You know, I know the audience, you have no doubt that we have two eminent teachers, professors here with us today. And what we just have a taste of is just a wealth of information. And I just want to thank you, Dr. Ward, for doing that Lund curve and making a wonderful introduction for our next speaker by saying this is how it also may be in a family. We can look at the same thing as relating to a family. And the next speaker, without further ado, is Lynn Walsh, the other half of Dr. Thomas Walsh's family. She has a master's in clinical social work from Fordham University and another master's in divinity from the Unification Theological Seminary. And she taught sociology at the University of Bridgeport for over 15 years. And she teaches, as mentioned before, at Unification Theological Seminary. And she's a director on the large scale of the UPF's Office of the Family and serves at the United Nations NGO Committee on the Family. And she has written chapters on the role of family in establishing the Millennium Development Goals in the family and the Millennium Development Goals and the Family Capital and the Sustainable Development Goals, respectively. She and her husband, Thomas Walsh, have 2 sons and 2 granddaughters, and she's an expert as a mother to make peace and love manifest in the family. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Berg. I wish I could say I'm an expert at bringing peace in my family, but I'm still learning, and it's a wonderful trip. Thank you very, very much for including me in this panel. It's really an honor. You know, the subject is so important, and my job is to especially emphasize the family, which I thank you, Dr. Ward. You've mentioned some really important factors why resolving conflict and learning in the family is really pivotal. And just so my hope is in speaking that just as we, in much of our policy and our discussion, we talk about, how important it is to protect the environment, but we don't talk about how important it is to protect and support the family. So I hope to make that more clear. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about are subjects that I am going to be included in my course, which I'm really pleased to be slotted to teach, which is Marriage and Family and Human Development. So again, thank you for the chance. I'm not talking so much about religion, but it's very evident that religious people have more solid families. They are less likely to be divorced. They're more likely to resolve conflict because they have that higher consciousness of it's not all about me. I am not the ultimate judge of what's right and wrong. So our faith really adds a factor that brings stability into marriage. And studies show that the more often you go to church, children do better academically, socially, mentally, and again, the family is more likely to be intact. Let's see. By the way, I don't have any fancy, pretty PowerPoint like you guys have. I have pieces of paper that I will be sliding around. Okay, so Dr. Ward mentioned that I teach counseling. I do. My background is as a psychiatric family therapist in a hospital, but I really have found that I much prefer teaching relationship education because it gives people tools and values that they are empowered to make their relationships better. And I find that, again, religion is one of those. It adds that perspective that strengthens kind of a self-corrective element to, am I being responsible? Am I being a loving human being? And religion really helps in that direction because really the greatest challenge in life is learning how to love and be loved. Okay, I am so far off my notes, I can't believe it. My dear husband mentioned 8 factors that contribute to conflict, and really all those factors are reflected in the MDGs and the SDGs. And if you look at all those factors, poverty, education, maternal mortality, all those factors are definitely can be improved or worsened if the family is weak or strong. Poverty, the breakdown of family has been huge. The feminization of poverty is because of our loosening of marital commitment, we have so many more single mothers who are in poverty and their children, and single parents need to be supported and appreciated, but most single parents say, a single mother would say, I'd much prefer having a responsible, loving father to help raise my child. So poverty increases almost 4 times if it's not a marital relationship. Fatherless is a huge problem, which we don't talk about enough. We know that the fatherlessness, violent criminals in prisons are like 90% of them are from fatherless, I think it's even higher than that, fatherless homes. In communities where there are not very many involved fathers, there's much higher rate of crime and violence. And drugs. Young women, if they're not raised by a father, engaged father, or at least father figure, they're much more likely to become pregnant as a teenager. So we go into more of a cycle. So we don't talk enough about how fathers are incredibly important. By the way, marriage reduces testosterone, which reduces aggression. And they did a study that prisoners who have spent time with their child they reduce testosterone, which means it could reduce aggression. Okay, domestic violence. If you are in a stable family and you're biologically related to your children, there's much less likely child abuse. There's also much less likely to be domestic violence within the partner, because there's security and there's trust. There's not like other men floating around that parented other children. So it makes it that trust and that security is really critically important to deepen the relationship. And if you don't have that, it makes sense that there's more violence and aggression. Married men earn more than unmarried men. They're more motivated to do their best, to keep working, to sacrifice. They save more, so it's better for the economy. Interesting that we do a lot of trying to empower women in the world, such as microfinancing. But they found in terms of domestic violence, if they just give microfinancing or financial assistance to women, it can create more conflict in that relationship with the man. So if there's other programs that do microfinancing, but they bring in the man and they work on the relationship, that reduces conflict. So you can't just help the woman and think that you're helping the unit, because it's a family unit. If you're bringing that unity together, you're going to make a more stability, trust, and partnership that's going to help reduce violence and poverty and all of this. Slip of my paper. Demography. We know a lot of countries, I think 100, anyway, a lot of countries are really struggling with low birth rate, certainly all the developed countries. And low birth rate definitely impacts economic situation. When when there are less workers and providers and people that are paying taxes, there's more elderly people that are no longer working. Well, the economy is going to go down. So many countries are dealing with this. Actually, South Korea is one of the worst. It's somewhere like 0.8%, birth rate per woman. That's one of the lowest in the world. 2.1 is the replication rate. So if there's a woman is having 2.1 children, that means there's enough stability. The economy is stable enough. South Korea is actually a little bit better birth rate, but the infant mortality is horrible. It's like 7 times worse. So demographics are important. Also, sex ratio imbalance. We know that China has a one-child policy for many, many years, and now they're suffering because there's way too many men than women. So what happens? Men generally need channeling of their energy, and marriage is a great way. So men that cannot find a wife need to channel their energy. And this is from a great book by Dr. Valerie Hudson on Bare Branches, about her studies in China, that yes, there's more social unrest and complaint and unhappiness because young men don't have a way to channel their energy. So what do? Well, they have strong military, and we see China pushing nationalism and a very aggressive international policies, because that's a way to channel the energy. Interesting, Ukraine and Russia. This was a presentation that we had, I think, during the Global Day of Parents, UPF, Dr. Lyman Stone from Institute for Family Studies. He said that, of course, Russia has a low birth rate, but Ukraine is even worse. And according to him, Russia saw that after Russia did some policies, it increased the birth rate, better than Ukraine. He said that part of the reason why they invaded Ukraine was because Ukraine's birth rate was so bad that they're very vulnerable. So it has a lot to do with security, the family. Okay, mental health. We know that there's a real problem of depression, suicide, drug abuse. We see that in America. It's horribly prevalent. Well, drugs is not, sometimes they're helpful, but really having supportive, stable, emotionally safe relationships is the best remedy for having a purpose in life and overcoming depression. We need those human connected relationships. We've pushed for sexual freedom, but that's actually not what human beings long for. They long for real human connection. And we're making it harder and harder to attain that unless we go back to that very foundational understanding of why family and commitment and marriage is important. What do we learn from the family? Dr. Ward was really talking about it. Yeah, we learn how to handle conflict. We learn how to understand somebody that's very different than you. I have to understand my husband. And he has to understand me. But what a gift. What a gift to expand my mind and heart to learn how to love another person. So if we can demonstrate that in family, then our children learn it too. They learn empathy. They see the value of men and women. They learn very viscerally how important men and women are and their cooperation and their complementarity, because they are different and they relate differently, they parent differently, but the unity of them is what children want. So in terms of overcoming gender inequality, the best place is in a stable marriage, absolutely. And then even more fundamentally, there's a lot of studies on what's called secure attachment. The infant, first 3 years of their life, if they are treated with stability and responsiveness with their parents. I don't know if I'm going over my time.
Yes.
I am. Oh my goodness. Okay. So anyway, it leads them, if we have a stable upbringing, we have like a neurological path to be empathetic and to be a peace builder. And okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Lynn Walsh. I appreciate that. And yeah, the lady got the last word, and it was wonderful. Put us guys straight so we can have peace in the world. And to moderate this, the next round, we have our eminent president of UPF here in the US and North America, Dr. Michael Jenkins. And anyway, Mrs. Walsh, thank you so much for your sharing. I appreciate it. Thank you. You brought it, so to say, you brought it home, and that's where it starts and that's where it ends. Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Dr. Berg. Thank you for this wonderful program. Dr. Thomas Walsh, Dr. Thomas Ward, and Mrs. Lynn Walsh, thank you sincerely for this important topic. We've got some questions from the audience. I have some additional questions, but to start off, I'd like to ask Dr. Walsh or Dr. Ward to address what was the discussion that led to the UN Charter, and was there an involvement by the Soviet Union to block the reference to faith or God in that discussion? Did the Soviet Union play a role there? Or was that really on the table? Was it going to be a more generic constitutional document that has those values but doesn't really mention God or honor God? Either one, maybe both of you. Dr. Ward, maybe I'll ask you first.
I was going to defer to Dr. Walsh, actually.
All right, we can do that if you like.
Well, I'll say a couple of things real quickly. Great question. Both FDR and Churchill were, maybe I'd say, kind of liberal Christians, but one of the significant points, they were good friends, or they became good friends and close. And one of the key moments was during World War II in 1942 or 43. They met together off the coast of Nova Scotia on a British boat and mapped out what came to be called the Atlantic Charter. And that was kind of the beginning of one of the turning points toward the United Nations. So the United Nations name even came out of the name that was used for the Allied group that was combating Hitler. So it was kind of in use at that time, referring to the allies with the United States and Europe, France and Italy, et cetera. But one of the interesting things is that two of them, along with their entourages, had a Sunday service together and were singing Christian hymns. So they definitely were people of faith. But it is true, and the charter had to be worked out in San Francisco, and the charter is being drafted in the latter days of World War II. Throughout 1945, the war is still going on into the summer of 45. And it was true, there was a lot of negotiation with the USSR, which at that time was an ally against Hitler in particular. And I think there was a certain recognition that if the document were more religious in nature, it would not bring in what I think they felt at that time very critical to have the USSR on board. So that's a quick comment to that, and Dr. Ward can elaborate or correct things that I said.
I think you covered it very well, Dr. Walsh. Thank you.
Okay, good. So there wasn't really an active involvement of the Soviet Union demanding or requesting that there be no spiritual affirmation in the charter.
Well, they were involved in San Francisco, and there was a lot of back and forth. I forget the names exactly of who was there, and the name Gromyko comes to mind, but I'm not sure he was the primary person. But it was clear that the USSR was a atheistic state, was committed to that, so they didn't want to do anything that would be a deal breaker in there. But at the same time, there were a lot of, for example, religious NGOs, the Quakers and Jewish organizations, and a Muslim leader from Lebanon who was one of the drafters, helped draft it. So there were a lot of religions who their faith-based idealism, in many ways, they didn't feel they had to have doctrine or specific theology, or even necessarily, if it was going to be a deal breaker with the then Soviet Union as a major power, not to infuse the document with religious language. I don't know how much the Soviets were adamant in protesting it, or was just kind of understood that would be almost like what Dr. Ward was saying in the Lund curve. There's certain topics that you already know. If you want to bring up Taiwan, you're not going to get a deal about this deal. So you kind of bracket that so you can move forward.
Lynn, the family is very central to your presentation, the importance of family and the reduction of testosterone when you have a family. Are there any particular religions you would point out that are stronger with family and therefore more peaceful? Anything that you've come across in that way, as we're also talking about the role of religions, both the good and the difficult?
By the way, I try not to tell young men that marriage reduces your testosterone. Don't want to discourage them. Religions that honor equally men and women are really important. Christianity tends tends to do that. Seeing them as different is also important because contrary to popular sentiment, men and women are very different. So yeah, I guess that's what I want to focus on. Yeah.
Okay. So is there any particular faith that seems to have more influence on family and marriage? And I'm not talking about our founders in particular. I'm talking about any of the major world religions that seem to have a stronger track record of marriage and family staying together.
Yeah, I guess I don't know per se, but definitely stronger religious commitment. All of them, all major religions, mainstream religions promote family and, you know, honor motherhood and fatherhood. So I can't say one is better than the other. If the culture promotes polygamy, that is not good. That weakens women's role and actually causes, like, the demographics of having some men with many wives, well, that leaves a lot of men without wives, and that stimulates violence and unrest. So that if that's in the culture, it's not necessarily in the religion, but if it's in the culture and the religion, then that's not peace building.
Dr. Ward, what about Christianity in North Korea? We've heard there's an underground movement there. Can you tell us about that? And is that possible to influence the current government?
You know, I was blessed to be able to visit North Korea 2 times. And the second time that I went there, I did visit 2 Korean churches. One was a Catholic church, the other was a Protestant church. Both of them, I think, were pretty tightly controlled by the Korean government. But I did feel that the people that I had an opportunity to meet with, we prayed together with them, we sang with them. I did feel that at least some of them, they were definitely people who were people of faith. Father and Mother Moon did very important work in North Korea. And very soon after Father Moon's visit to North Korea, Dr. Billy Graham also visited North Korea. And his son, Franklin Graham, has visited North Korea 4 times. And actually, his organization, the Samaritan's Purse, they've literally made, you know, scores of visits to North Korea. One of the points that Franklin Graham likes to make to the North Korean government is the Christians, they can be your supporters. You know, if you listen to them, if you support them, they can be your supporters. They can inform you, they can advise you, they can also help you in terms of warming your relations towards the West. So, do I think that that Christianity has a strong public role in North Korea? No, I don't. Do I think that it's possible that at some point North Korea might appreciate the fact that their Christians can serve as a bridge in terms of them being able to establish more relations with the West? I think I concur with Franklin Graham on that actually there is that potential. And I certainly see that he's trying to play that kind of a role to be a bridge and an advocate for them, actually.
So I'd like to just open up for a few minutes of just discussion, open discussion. Let's talk about how peace education incorporates religious teaching or religious values at UTS. I'm very interested in this area. What aspect of religious values or religious examples, Dr. Martin Luther King or whatever, are used in the Peace Studies program?
Well, maybe I can say a few things about that, Dr. Walsh.
Please.
We have a number of courses, obviously, where we do introduce, some of the people whom I mentioned, particularly, I think, Gandhi was a very interesting figure. And sometimes there is a confusion between pacifism and nonviolence, as it was advocated for by Gandhi. Gandhi made the point, he said, given the choice between accepting the status quo and violence, I choose violence. He said that, he made it clear. However, he also made the point, but I'm convinced that the best way to affect change is through the path of nonviolence, through the path of what he called satyagraha, so this whole going that way instead. And so we do elaborate on for example, on the work of a figure such as Gandhi, who did amazing things and who was absolutely committed to he said, you have to follow all the law. You have to be the best to follow the law. But if there's one law that you strongly feel is unjust, it's appropriate for you to be able to protest that particular law. But otherwise, you respect the law. You become an outstanding citizen. And in that way, you can step by step be able to make your way forward. So anyway, there are so many remarkable stories. Obviously, the case of Gandhi, as I mentioned, Abdul Ghaffar Khan, very important, He's sometimes referred to as the Muslim Gandhi. And actually, he lived until 1988. I feel so sad he wasn't awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, because he was so central to the whole advancement of a nonviolent movement among Muslims. And he really emphasized that within the teachings of Muhammad, there was the concept of endurance, acceptance, perseverance, that could be used as the basis likewise for having a nonviolent demeanor. And he and his followers, they went through so many things, and yes, so but we see through that as well, like within Islam also there's an example. I regret the fact that he didn't win the Nobel Prize, because I think maybe Islam would not have had to go through the sad chapter of terrorism that it went through in the 2000s. And obviously, Dr. Martin Luther King and all of his incredible work, and very much inspired by Gandhi, but also inspired by the gospel and by the U.S. Constitution and the ideals that are there. And the EDSA revolution, what went on. So we do go through all of those different religious figures as models. But there's another side to peace studies, which is a social science side as well. So we look at both the religious and the social science dimensions.
Dr. Walsh. And by the way, I'd like to ask permission to our audience and to you to go till 3:10. We have a couple more minutes. Dr. Walsh?
Just very briefly, there's a way of looking at the goal of, let's say, the New Testament or the Old Testament. Shalom and peace are ways of envisioning the providential purpose of religion, that we are moving toward the kingdom of God, or the ideal community, the heavenly community, the holy community, is in a certain way of understanding the aspiration, the goal, the universal value that underlies all the religions. So we offer courses that draw on world scripture as an anthology of sacred texts to illustrate how all the religions at least share that ideal of peace in the individual, family, society, nation, and ultimately in a kind of an eschatological way or vision. So
Pierre wrote, Dr. Walsh, that you mentioned it's a mistake to be non-religious. Can we differentiate between those who are non-religious and those who are anti-religious? I'm thinking emerging post-materialist scientists and those whose identity they identify as spiritual.
Yes, I think that I must have misspoke. What I intended to say was that even non-religious people should become, I'm not saying you have to be a believer, but in order to build a better world, understanding religion, like I may not play the violin, but it may be helpful for me to understand about music and classical music and its history and impact on the world. Religious literacy is extremely important and valuable. And yes, there's a distinction between those in organized religions, those that opt out of organized religions but maintain a commitment to spirituality. And then you have those that want to be non-religious on a spectrum or even anti-religious. And some of them revert back to a kind of a secular religion where they still have doctrine, ritual, ethics, and absolutes, but they don't use the conventional language of religion, but they're as committed to their worldview as religious people are. So you could call them secular religion. Some have attributed current social activist groups as having that kind of religious commitment without using that conventional language.
Well, that's just shed some good light on this whole area. We can respect all people and non-religious people and so forth, but we do need to understand religious people and not just box them into our own category, what we think. And Lynn, one interesting thing about your work with families, Susan brought up that social workers can be very good to speak to the gaps in education in families that allow them to be self-sufficient, but supported by agencies and keeping people on dependency. And the trend of government agencies is also really cautious about bringing any religious value into the discussion. Now, I know a lot of social workers out there are very, very religious, and they ignore those kind of standards and still teach the fundamental principles that are godly. What's your thoughts on that? Helping the family. You're so clear about the situation of crime. 90% of those inmates who male come from single parent families with no father. That's astonishing. What about the faith aspect of bringing that into the families, and what can we do to help that?
Yeah, it's true that the government doesn't smile upon introducing religious values in your counseling session as a social worker, but helping a couple or a person find a community that's supportive of spiritual growth. One of the best communities is a religious community. And if this community supports marriage and family, then that will helpfully, help them get on the right track. But so I think encourage spiritual growth. Maybe can't say religious. And I think the best spiritual path is our relationships, and especially marriage. So in counseling, you can kind of guide them to values that lead to religion, or at least spiritual seeking.
Thank you so much. Final comments, everyone, just a 30-second final word. Dr. Ward.
Well, yes, I thank you very much for organizing today's program, Dr. Jenkins and Dr. Berg. And it's very inspiring to see that there is so much interest in this field. We have spent Unificationists, we've spent our whole life in the pursuit of peace, and I think our movement brings an awful lot to the table, and this is just the time, maybe more than any other, when we can be able to really play an important role. So I'm grateful.
Dr. Walsh.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Please apply to UTS. I guarantee you'll have tremendous experience and capacity building for your own ability to serve in the world and to serve heaven and God's providence.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lynn?
Yes, I think definitely the time has come, and UPF has built so many relationships in so many areas, conservative, not conservative, religious, not religious, and to really draw together what's most important, universal values, is the glue that this world needs. So I'm really honored that, your mother has this vision and has created this. So I'm happy to be aboard. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. We're very excited about the program today. We'd like to have another one soon, because I think that this is delving into a deeper area of how we can be real peace builders. And I do want to encourage everyone to look at the Peace Studies program for the master's degree at UTS. I think it's very significant. I see some of the young people that are in the course becoming much more capable to express options that lead to peace. So really, that is a great step forward for UTS and for peace education. So I'd like to turn it back over to Dr. Berg. I really thank you, Dr. Berg, to put this prestigious panel together of scholars that are really working as representatives of the vision of Father and Mother Moon. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins, and thank you, everybody on the panel, Dr. Walsh, Mrs. Walsh, Dr. Ward, and everybody who logged on to be on this webinar. You all contributed. Otherwise, we would just be a voice crying in the woods without nobody listening. So you made it valuable because you listened. And the next step, take the action step. So as Dr. Jenkins said, sign on at UTS. Another way to do an action step is love your family. And you might even go further. Love your neighbor. And as we heard, the power to do that may come from your spiritual walk. So I really appreciate all of you. Thank you for logging on. And as you know, Tuesday, every week at this time, there is a webinar. And your friends at UPF are announcing it. So don't despair if you don't have all the answers. They may come next week. So thank you so much. And I look forward to see you next time. God bless you, everybody.
Thank you.